So I've nearly finished my classical version of theme and variations on the first phrase of Twinkle. I'm mainly doing this as an exercise in testing out the limits of the program. The first thing I would ask you to notice is that for each variation I have a different band. But in my case I'm not actually changing the band. I'm just pretending to change the band so that I can change the volume and possibly the octave placement of each of the three instruments I'm using. So my three instruments are violin, cello and harp. I'm not changing the instruments throughout my entire piece, but I am changing whether they're playing legato or staccato, and I'm also sometimes putting them up or down the octave, and I'm certainly changing the balance, the dynamics, the balance of the layers in each band. Violin, legato, cello, smart, harp, walking bass, violin, staccato, cello, staccato, harp, half beat. Yeah, so I'm just testing out different varieties of accompaniment styles, but only keeping the same instruments. And sometimes I'm, as you can see here, muting the instrument altogether. So this is a very classical sounding one. The other way I made it sound more classical is that I wrote the second part. So let's take this theme. If I just make that invisible and make the active voice number one, you can just see that I've got the ordinary sounding theme in the melody. But when I put in voice 2, you can see I've written another part, and if I just make this voice 1 invisible for a minute and make voice 2 visible, you'll be able to see that I've done manual voice 2 parts for the cello in each variation. So in this one it was a fairly simple bass line. In this was sort of like a little offbeat notes that sounded slightly melodic but not very. In this one you can see it's little counter melody fragments. In this one it's little arpeggiations of the chords themselves, which is easy to do because it shows you the notes. You can see that I'm using the notes of the chord. In this one I just made the cello part sort of a third below the melody, or a third above, I can't remember. I just tried both and it sounded quite nice. In this one I did a little counter melody, sort of like a almost like a imitation. You can see the shape is similar, isn't it? And in this one, what did I do? A fairly simple bassliney bit, and in this final one they're actually playing in what looks like unison but is actually an octave apart. So I did quite a lot of work with writing manual, what's called the lead 2 part. So I put the main melody on the top and a lead 2 part on the bottom, and then I just chose harp parts, the sort of bass line, which was my harp, various versions of the harp part. As you can see, there's quite a lot of alternatives, and I just listened to them and decided which one sounded the nicest. So I'm pretty happy with this, but it's not entirely finished because I feel like instead of always giving the cello the counter melody and always giving the violin the melody, I could swap it around in a couple of places. But have a listen to it as it is now, and I'll do a bit of live commentary. So a simple presentation of the theme with a cello bass line and a simple harp bass line. The tempo's slower, the melody's in staccato, the cello's playing little offbeat notes. The tempo's changed, the melody rhythm has changed. So the melody is basically in arpeggio. I'll just make that one invisible so you can see. It's sort of quite arpeggiated. It's not the real melody. And then I added a second very quick sort of triplet melody in arpeggios as well. Can you see how I'm just using chordal notes of the chords in a daddle-a-dum, a semiquaver triplet, I think that is. But made it quite a nice contrast between the two things. And then this next one is in C minor, and it uses, I'll just get rid of the complicated bits. You can see it uses little dips, lower auxiliary notes, and see how quite a lot of them are stripy. That's saying that they're a chromatic lower auxiliary note, and I did this by using the raise or lower half business over here. And obviously we're in C minor, so it sounds a bit cooler. And the second voice, which I'll just make visible now, looks very like the first one, doesn't it? Because I actually made them basically in thirds with each other. In fact, I think the second voice is most of the time a third higher than the first voice. And because this variation was quite busy in the upper two parts, I made the bass part very, very simple. I'm still in C major. The tempo is a little bit faster. I've made a melody with lots of passing notes, and you can see in these brown boxes that the cello part is imitating the shape of the melody. Obviously I just pasted it in as we did in class, and then I changed any of the notes in the cello part that didn't seem to go with the chords. So let's listen to this one. And they're in thirds in bar 23. And you can hear this is slightly slower, and the melody's in tum-tees, dotted crotchet quaver. And in this very final one, the violin and the cello are playing in octaves with each other. It looks like they're playing the same notes here, but they're not. And I slightly changed the harmony, put an extra chord in there. The harmony itself is creating a bass line because some of these chords are in inversion. So we've got C, and then we've got G, F, E, G, E, D, G, C. So the bass line of the chords is making quite an attractive sort of melodic shape, just from the choices of inversion that I made.